The steering wheel was slick beneath my palms, a film of humid city grime and my own nervous sweat. My car, a rattling decade-old sedan I'd named the Hopeful, coughed at a stoplight, its engine shuddering in a way that always tightened a knot of anxiety in my gut. It was the last grocery delivery of the day, a small mercy. My shoulders ached from hauling cases of sparkling water up 3 flights of stairs for a woman who hadn't tipped, and my stomach was a hollow cavern echoing with the phantom scent of the rotisserie chickens I'd packed for someone else's dinner. This was my life, a series of small, exhausting transactions that barely kept my head above the tide of bills on my kitchen counter. I lived in a state of carefully managed decline. My apartment was small, the kind of place where you could wash dishes and watch television at the same time. Its saving grace was a single, large window that looked out not at another brick wall, but at the rolling green hills that cradled the edge of the city. And perched at the very top of the highest hill, like a quiet observer to the world's frantic scuttling, was the Croft estate. It wasn't a mansion in the gaudy, modern sense. It was a long, low-slung structure of dark stone and rich wood, built into the landscape rather than on top of it. It spoke of old money, the kind that didn't need to shout. I knew who lived there. Everyone did. Julian Croft. He was a local legend, a man who had built a quiet tech empire and then retired in his late 40s to manage his investments and his privacy. He was rarely seen. There were no flashy cars roaring down his long, winding driveway, no loud parties echoing across the valley. There was only a steady, quiet presence, the warm glow of lights in the evening, a curl of smoke from a chimney on a cold day. He was a fixed point in my shifting, uncertain world. Sometimes, late at night when my own loneliness was a physical weight, I would look up at his house and wonder what a life like that felt like. A life with a foundation. The delivery app chimed, pulling me from my thoughts. Turn right onto Blackwood Lane. I squinted at the screen, then at the street sign. The address was 12 Blackwood Lane. Simple enough. But as I drove, the lane grew narrower, the houses grander, and set further back from the road, hidden behind old stone walls and thick curtains of ivy. The numbers were erratic, some posted clearly, others obscured by overgrown rose bushes. I passed number 8, then a long stretch of wall that seemed to go on forever. This had to be it. The next gate was set deep into the stone, wrought iron scrolled into the shape of oak leaves. There was no number. My phone's GPS was spinning, confused. I pulled over, the gravel crunching under my tires. The app insisted I had arrived. I checked the customer's name, J. Carter. Not Croft. But the address was 12 Blackwood. Maybe it was a guest house, or a groundskeeper's cottage. I got out, the air thick with the scent of damp earth and blooming jasmine. The sheer scale of the wall was intimidating. I walked to the gate and found a small, discreet call box. I pressed the button, the silence that followed so profound it felt like a sound in itself. For a long moment, nothing happened. I was about to give up, to mark the delivery as undeliverable and deal with the hit to my rating, when the speaker crackled to life. A voice, low and calm, with a texture like worn leather, came through. Yes. I cleared my throat, suddenly feeling like a trespasser. Hi. I have a grocery delivery for J. Carter. At 12, Blackwood Lane. My GPS says this is the spot, but I don't see a number. There was another pause. Not a confused pause, but a thoughtful one. I could almost feel the weight of a gaze through the speaker, a steady assessment. There is number 12 Blackwood, the voice said, without a trace of irritation. The numbers on this lane are imaginative. What is the order? I fumbled with my phone. Just a few things. Milk, bread, some organic vegetables, a bottle of red wine. My own dinner tonight would be instant ramen, and the contrast was a sharp, bitter pill. Another silence. Then, the voice again, closer, it seemed. I see. And you are? Leo. From Instagrow, my voice sounded thin. Leo, he repeated, the name sounding solid and real in his mouth. Then, a soft click, and the heavy iron gate began to swing inward with a silent, powerful grace. Bring it up to the house. It seems I ordered groceries I didn't know I needed, my heart hammered against my ribs. This was Julian Croft. It had to be. I was at the wrong address, a complete and utter mistake, and instead of being turned away, I was being invited in. I hesitated for a second, a primal instinct screaming at me to get back in my car and drive away from a situation I couldn't understand. But the quiet authority in his voice wasn't a command, it was an assurance. It was safer to go forward than to retreat. I grabbed the grocery bags from the passenger seat, their plastic handles digging into my fingers, and started up the long, curving driveway. The house grew larger as I approached, revealing itself not as imposing, but as settled. It was part of the hill. Moss grew in the crevices of the stone, and the massive windows reflected the darkening sky without glare. The front door, a heavy slab of dark oak, was already open, and standing in the doorway was Julian Croft. He was older than the few blurry photos I'd seen online suggested, probably in his early 50s. His hair was more salt than pepper, cut short and neat. He wore a simple gray cashmere sweater and dark trousers, clothes that probably cost more than my monthly rent, but looked comfortable, lived in. But it was his face that held me. It was a map of quiet intelligence, with laugh lines around his eyes that suggested a warmth his stoic expression tried to conceal. His eyes were a deep, clear gray, and they watched me approach with an unnerving stillness. There was no judgment in them, only a calm, patient observation. "Leo," he said again as I reached the stone steps. His voice was even richer in person, a low baritone that seemed to vibrate in the air. "I apologize for the confusion. The lane numbering is a long-standing feud with the town council. It's my fault," I stammered, hoisting the bags. "I should have double-checked. My app must have glitched. I'm really sorry to bother you, Mr. Croft." A small smile touched his lips, softening the severe lines of his face. "There's no need to apologize. And please, call me Julian. Since you've brought my phantom dinner, the least I can do is help you with it." He reached out and took 2 of the bags from me. His fingers brushed against mine, just for a second. The contact was nothing, a fleeting accident, but a jolt of warmth shot up my arm. His hands were large and capable, the skin calloused, as if he worked with them despite a life that wouldn't require it. He turned and led me inside. The interior of the house was a surprise. I had expected something cold and museum-like, but it was anything but. The air smelled of old books, beeswax, and a faint, clean scent of cedar. The foyer opened into a large living area with a stone fireplace, shelves filled with books from floor to ceiling, and comfortable-looking leather furniture. Everything was orderly, but not sterile. It was a space designed for living, for quiet contemplation. It felt like a sanctuary. "The kitchen is this way," he said, his voice a quiet guide in the stillness. I followed him, feeling clumsy and out of place, my worn sneakers silent on the polished slate floors. The kitchen was a masterpiece of stainless steel and dark wood, but like the rest of the house, it felt functional, used. A copper kettle sat on the stove, and a half-read newspaper was folded neatly on a large central island. He set the bags on the counter. "Thank you, Leo." He looked at the groceries, the simple, everyday items, and then back at me. "J. Carter at 14 Blackwood will have to wait for his wine." There was a glint of humor in his eyes. "I can take it to them," I offered quickly. "It's just down the road." "I'm so sorry for the mix-up." "No," he said, the words soft but final. "It's starting to rain. And I'm sure you're at the end of your shift." He wasn't asking. He was stating a fact he'd somehow gleaned from my tired posture. He opened one of the bags and took out the bottle of red wine. "I'll call my neighbor and explain. He owes me a bottle anyway." He then looked at me, his gaze direct. "Let me pay you for these, and for your time." Before I could protest, he pulled a wallet from his pocket and extracted 2 crisp $100 bills, holding them out to me. My breath caught. The groceries couldn't have cost more than $40. The tip was extravagant, almost insultingly so. My face must have shown my discomfort, because his expression softened. "It's for the trouble," he said gently, "and for navigating my ridiculous street. Please. It would make me feel better." He framed it as a favor to him, a subtle shift that erased the sting of charity and replaced it with a sense of courteous transaction. I took the money, my fingers feeling clumsy. "Thank you," I managed to say. That's very generous. It's practical," he corrected quietly. He put the milk and bread away with an economy of movement that was fascinating to watch. Every action was deliberate, purposeful. He moved like a man who was completely at ease in his own skin, in his own space. He was a force of quiet gravity, and I felt myself being pulled into his orbit, my own frantic energy starting to settle just by being near him. He closed the refrigerator door and turned back to me. The kitchen was large, but it suddenly felt intimate. The only sounds were the soft hum of the fridge and the patter of rain beginning to tap against the windows. "Can I offer you something? Water, a cup of tea? Before you head back out into that," he nodded toward the window, where the drizzle was now a steady downpour. I should have said no. I should have thanked him again and fled back to the safety of my rattling car and my lonely apartment. But the thought of leaving the calm, warm quiet of this house for the cold, wet chaos outside was unbearable. And more than that, I didn't want to go. I wanted to stay in his presence for a few minutes longer, to soak in the stillness he seemed to radiate. Tea would be nice, I heard myself say, the words a surprise even to me. "If it's not too much trouble, it's no trouble at all," Julian said, and the smile that touched his lips this time reached his eyes, making them shine. "Have a seat." He gestured to the stools at the island, already turning to fill the copper kettle with water. I felt like I had just stepped through a door into a different world, and I had no idea how to navigate it. All I knew was that for the first time in a very long time, I felt safe. I sat on one of the heavy, dark wood stools at the island, my hands clasped awkwardly in my lap. The leather of the seat was cool and smooth. I watched Julian move about his kitchen, his actions efficient and graceful. He took down 2 mugs from a cabinet, simple, hand-thrown pottery in a deep blue glaze. He spooned loose-leaf tea into a pot, his movements precise. He did it all with a quiet focus, as if making tea was an important ritual, deserving of his full attention. The silence between us wasn't uncomfortable. It was a comfortable, weighted silence, filled with the small sounds of his task and the drumming of the rain against the roof. I found myself studying him, noticing the fine lines etched at the corners of his eyes, the way a single lock of silver hair fell across his forehead. He was a man who had lived, who had clearly weathered storms far greater than a bit of rain, and had come out the other side with this unshakable calm. "Do you enjoy your work?" he asked, his back still to me as he waited for the water to boil. The question was simple, direct, yet it felt deeply personal. No one ever asked me that. They asked how the tips were, or if the traffic was bad. I hesitated. "It pays the bills," I said, the standard, non-committal answer. "Most of them, anyway." He turned slightly, his gray eyes meeting mine. He didn't offer pity or platitudes. He just nodded, a small, accepting gesture. I understand, and somehow, I knew he did. Not my specific brand of financial anxiety, perhaps, but the broader sense of being constrained by necessity. The kettle whistled, a shrill cry in the quiet room. He poured the water into the teapot, the steam rising in a fragrant cloud that smelled of bergamot and something else, something warm and spicy. He set the pot on the counter to steep, then leaned his hips against the opposite side of the island, facing me. He folded his arms across his chest, a casual posture that nonetheless felt solid, rooted. "What did you do before this, Leo?" he asked, his tone one of genuine curiosity. "I was in school," I admitted, looking down at my hands. "Studying landscape architecture. I had to take a break. For financial reasons, it was the sanitized version. The full story involved my father's sudden illness, the mountain of medical debt he'd left behind when he died, and the slow, grinding process of my own dreams being crushed under the weight of it all. Landscape architecture," he mused, his gaze drifting toward the large window that overlooked his back garden. Even in the gray, fading light, I could see it was a masterpiece of design. Terraced stone walls, carefully placed shrubs that offered texture and color, and a massive old oak tree that stood like a sentinel at the far end of the lawn. A noble pursuit, shaping the earth, creating order out of chaos. He understood. The way he said it, he wasn't just talking about plants and soil. He was talking about the core impulse behind it, the desire to build something beautiful and lasting. I felt a blush creep up my neck. It had been years since I'd talked about it with anyone, years since I'd allowed myself to even think about it with anything other than a sharp pang of loss. He poured the tea into the 2 mugs, the dark amber liquid steaming. He slid one across the smooth surface of the island to me. I wrapped my cold fingers around it, the warmth seeping into my skin. It was a simple, profound comfort. "My late wife designed this garden," he said softly, his voice losing some of its resonant power, becoming quieter, more intimate. "It was her passion. I try to maintain it, but I lack her touch. Her vision. He looked out the window again, but I knew he wasn't seeing the rain-slicked leaves. He was seeing a memory. The admission of loss, of inadequacy, was a crack in his stoic facade. It was a moment of vulnerability that he shared with me, a stranger who had shown up at his door by mistake. It was a gift, and it shifted the dynamic between us. He wasn't just a wealthy recluse. He was a man who had loved and lost, who found solace in the legacy of that love. We drank our tea in silence for a few minutes. I searched for something to say, something that wouldn't sound trite or invasive. "It's beautiful," I said finally, my voice low. "The garden. It has good bones. A strong design." Julian looked back at me, a flicker of surprise in his eyes, followed by a genuine smile. It transformed his face, erasing years of quiet reserve. "Thank you," he said. She would have liked hearing that. Especially from someone who knows what they're looking at. The rain began to let up, the drumming on the roof softening to a gentle hiss. The light outside was almost gone. I knew I had overstayed my welcome, that this strange, unexpected interlude had to end. I took a final sip of tea and pushed the mug gently forward. "Thank you for the tea, Julian," I said, testing his first name on my tongue. It felt right. "I should go? I'm sorry again for the mix-up." "Don't be," he said, his voice firm but kind. He didn't move from his spot, just watched me as I slid off the stool. It was a welcome interruption. As I turned to leave, he spoke again. "Leo." I stopped and looked back at him. He was still leaning against the counter, the blue mug held loosely in his hands. The fading light from the window cast his face in shadow, but I could still see the intensity in his gaze. "Drive carefully," he said. It was a simple phrase, something anyone would say. But coming from him, it felt like more. It felt like a blessing, a small act of protection. It felt like he was seeing me, truly seeing me, not just as a delivery driver, but as a person who needed to get home safely. I nodded, unable to find my voice. "I will." He walked me to the door, the same way he had led me in. He opened it, and a gust of cool, rain-washed air swept into the warm house. The world outside seemed louder, harsher, after the peace of his home. As I stepped onto the porch, I felt a strange reluctance to leave, a pull to stay in that circle of quiet warmth. "Good night, Leo," he said from the doorway. "Good night, Julian," I replied, and walked down the steps into the twilight, the $200 bills feeling like a talisman in my pocket. As I got into my car and started the engine, I looked back. He was still standing there, a solid silhouette in the golden light of the doorway, watching until my headlights had disappeared down the long, winding drive. The encounter with Julian Croft replayed in my mind for days, a continuous loop of small details. The low timbre of his voice, the way his eyes crinkled when he smiled, the solid, comforting weight of the ceramic mug in my hands. I'd driven away from his house feeling as if I'd been in a different reality, and returning to my own cramped apartment felt like waking from a dream. The $200 sat on my dresser, a stark reminder of the chasm between our worlds. I couldn't bring myself to spend it. It didn't feel like payment for a mistaken delivery. It felt like something else, something I couldn't yet define. I found myself altering my delivery routes, taking the long way home just for the chance to drive down Blackwood Lane. I'd slowed down as I passed his gate, my eyes searching for any sign of life. A light in a window, his dark sedan sweeping up the driveway. Each time, I felt a foolish, adolescent flutter in my chest. I was behaving like a stalker, and I knew it. But I couldn't help it. He was a puzzle, a pocket of stillness in my chaotic life, and I wanted, more than anything, to understand him. About a week later, my car finally gave up the ghost. It happened, of course, at the worst possible time. I had just finished a delivery run and was heading home, the engine making a sound like a bag of angry cats. It sputtered, coughed, and died in a plume of greasy smoke. And it died, with a kind of cosmic, narrative irony, less than a quarter-mile from Julian Croft's gate. I sat there for a long moment, my forehead resting on the steering wheel, a wave of pure, hopeless despair washing over me. This wasn't just an inconvenience. It was a catastrophe. My car was my livelihood. Without it, I couldn't work. Without work, I couldn't pay rent. The fragile structure of my life was about to come crashing down. I got out and kicked the tire, a useless, childish act of frustration that only made my toe throb. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, a beautiful spectacle that felt like a personal insult. I pulled out my phone to call a tow truck, my thumb hovering over the screen as I did a quick, frantic calculation of how much it would cost, how much I didn't have. That's when a sleek, dark gray sedan slowed and pulled over behind me. My heart leaped into my throat. I knew that car. The driver's side door opened, and Julian Croft unfolded himself from the vehicle. He was wearing a beautifully tailored suit, but he'd loosened his tie, looking like he was on his way home from a long day in the city. He walked toward me, his expression one of calm concern. "Car trouble?" he asked, his voice carrying easily in the quiet evening air. I felt a hot flush of shame. To be seen like this, stranded and helpless, by him of all people. "You could say that," I said, trying for a lightness I didn't feel. "I think it's finally terminal." He walked to the front of my car and peered at the engine bay, from which a thin wisp of smoke was still curling. He didn't seem to care about getting his expensive suit dirty. He just looked, his brow furrowed in concentration. He wasn't a car guy, I could tell, but he was a man who understood systems, who knew how to diagnose a problem. "This doesn't look good," he stated, not with pity, but with a pragmatist's clarity. He looked at me, his gray eyes searching my face. "Where were you headed?" "Home," I said. "But I think I'll be walking." "Nonsense," he said, the word sharp but not unkind. "I'll give you a ride. We can call a tow truck from my house. They'll be more responsive if the call comes from up there." He didn't say it, but we both knew what he meant. A call from the Croft estate carried more weight than a call from a random person stranded on the side of the road. It was a simple, unvarnished fact of life in this town. He didn't wait for my agreement. He simply gestured toward his car, an invitation that was also a gentle, unspoken command. As I got my bag from the passenger seat of my dead car, he placed a hand on my shoulder. It was a brief, steadying touch, meant to guide me, but it felt like so much more. The weight of his hand was grounding, a point of solid contact in my spinning world. The warmth of his palms seeped through the thin fabric of my t-shirt, and for a second, I just stood there, absorbing the feeling. It was an act of pure, uncomplicated care, and it almost brought me to my knees. He must have felt me tense up, because he removed his hand almost immediately, his expression unreadable. "Come on," he said softly. "Let's get you out of the road." The interior of his car was like his house, understated luxury. The scent of real leather and something clean, like sandalwood, filled the air. The engine was completely silent as he pulled away from the curb, leaving my broken-down hopeful behind like a shed skin. The ride to his gate was short, and we didn't speak. I was too overwhelmed by the situation, by the sheer mortifying coincidence of it all. Inside his house again, he was all quiet efficiency. He led me not to the kitchen this time, but to a study. It was a room lined with the same dark wood shelves, filled with more books. A large desk stood in front of a window that offered a panoramic view of the city lights beginning to twinkle below. He gestured for me to sit in one of the comfortable leather armchairs while he made the call. I listened as he spoke to the tow company. His voice was polite but firm, laced with an authority that got immediate results. A truck would be there in 20 minutes. They would tow the car to the best garage in town. He gave them his account number. "Just send the bill to me," he said, and hung up. "You can't do that," I blurted out as he turned back to me. "I can't let you pay for it." He regarded me for a long moment, his expression patient. "Leo," he said, his voice low and steady. "Let's call it a neighborly gesture. You're my neighbor, in the broader sense of the word. And your car broke down on my road. Allowing me to help is the easiest course of action for everyone." He was framing it logically, removing the emotion, making it impossible to argue with. "But there are no buts," he said, a hint of steel in his tone. He came and sat in the armchair opposite me, leaning forward, his elbows on his knees. The space between us felt charged. "Now, the more important question is, how will you get to work tomorrow?" The question hung in the air, heavy with all its implications. He had neatly sliced through my pride and gotten to the heart of the matter. My panic, which had been simmering just below the surface, threatened to boil over. "I don't know," I whispered, the admission costing me a great deal. He watched me, his gaze unwavering. I felt completely exposed, all my failures and fears laid bare for his inspection. I expected to see pity, or perhaps a polite dismissal. Instead, what I saw in his eyes was a deep, quiet empathy. He wasn't looking at me as a problem to be solved, but as a person in a difficult situation. "I have a proposition for you," he said after a long silence. "It's entirely self-serving. I assure you." The corner of his mouth ticked up in a small, self-deprecating smile. "My regular gardener is on holiday for the next 2 weeks. The grounds, they're getting away from me. I need someone with a good eye and strong hands to help me get them back in order before a charity event I'm hosting here." He paused, letting the offer settle. "I noticed the way you looked at my garden last week. You see things others don't. I would pay you well, far more than you'd make doing deliveries. And I have a small truck you could use for the duration, both for the work here and for your personal errands. It would solve my problem, and perhaps, temporarily, it would solve yours." My mind was racing. It was a perfect solution. Too perfect. A lifeline thrown by a man who barely knew me. The power imbalance was staggering. I would be working for him, dependent on him for my income and my transportation. It felt dangerous, like stepping onto a path from which there might be no return. "Why?" I asked, the word raw. "Why would you do this for me?" Julian leaned back in his chair, his gaze never leaving my face. The intensity there made my breath catch. "Because," he said slowly, choosing his words with care, "I believe in investing in potential. And because, for reasons I don't fully understand myself yet, I find that I want to help you." He said it so plainly, with such unadorned honesty, that it disarmed me completely. He wasn't offering charity. He was offering an opportunity, a contract, framed with clear boundaries and a stated purpose. He was giving me a choice, and in doing so, he was giving me back a measure of the agency I felt I had lost on the side of that road. I looked around the quiet, orderly room, at the books that held a world of knowledge, at the man who sat before me, a bastion of calm strength. And I thought of my tiny apartment, my dead car, my dwindling bank account. The choice wasn't really a choice at all. But for the first time, it didn't feel like a surrender. It felt like a step forward. "Okay," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "Yes, I'll do it." A slow smile spread across Julian's face, reaching his eyes and filling them with a warm, quiet light. "Good," he said. "You can start tomorrow morning." The next morning, Julian drove me to my apartment in the small but sturdy pickup truck he'd mentioned. It was an older model, impeccably maintained, and it felt like a tank after my flimsy sedan. He waited while I ran inside to change into my worn work clothes, feeling a strange self-consciousness about him, seeing the peeling paint and cracked linoleum of my building's lobby. When I came back out, he handed me the keys. "The garage code is on the key fob," he said. "Be here at 8. I'll show you the shed where the tools are kept." His tone was professional, that of an employer, but his eyes held a softer expression. It was a careful dance, this establishment of new boundaries. We were no longer just a man and a mistaken delivery driver. We were an employer and his temporary employee. The thought should have made me more anxious, but instead, it felt clarifying. It gave our interactions a structure, a safe container. Working in his garden was like stepping into another world. It was a vast, sprawling space, far larger than it appeared from the house. There were hidden corners, a stone bench tucked away under a weeping willow, a small, serene koi pond, and beds overflowing with a riot of carefully chosen plants. It was, as I'd first thought, a masterpiece of design, but Julian had been right. It was starting to look neglected around the edges. Weeds were creeping into the flower beds, and the roses desperately needed deadheading. For the first few days, we worked in a comfortable, mostly silent rhythm. He'd show me a section he wanted me to focus on, explain what needed to be done, and then leave me to it while he worked on another part of the garden himself. I was surprised to see him working at all. I had assumed he would simply direct me. But he was out there with me, on his knees in the dirt, his hands protected by worn leather gloves, methodically pulling weeds or trimming back overgrown shrubs. Watching him work was a revelation. He moved with the same quiet competence I'd seen in his kitchen. There was no wasted motion, no frustration, just a steady, focused effort. He seemed to find a deep satisfaction in the simple, physical labor. It was a side of him I never would have imagined. This billionaire who was not above getting his hands dirty, who found peace in the soil. Our conversations were brief, mostly about the tasks at hand. "The soil here is too acidic for the hydrangeas," I'd observe. He would listen intently, nodding. "What would you suggest?" he'd ask, his voice full of genuine curiosity. He treated my knowledge, limited as it was, with respect. He made me feel like an expert, a collaborator, not just a hired hand. One afternoon, we were working together to clear a particularly stubborn patch of ivy that was threatening to overwhelm a stone wall. It was hot, and the work was hard. Sweat trickled down my temples, and my muscles ached with a satisfying burn. We stopped for a break, sitting on the low stone wall, sharing a bottle of cold water he'd brought from the house. "You're good at this," he said, looking at the progress we'd made. "You have a natural feel for it. I used to love it," I confessed, wiping my brow with the back of my hand. Before everything changed, he was quiet for a moment, his gaze fixed on the distant city skyline. "Things change," he said, his voice soft. "Sometimes for the worse. But sometimes it clears a path for something new. Something you didn't expect." I wondered if he was talking about me, or about himself. About his wife. The thought made me bold. "Is it hard?" I asked, my voice low. "Maintaining this place? Her garden?" He didn't answer right away. He took a long drink of water, his throat working. "At first, it was," he said finally, his voice rough with an emotion he rarely showed. "It felt like a duty. A memorial. Every dying rose felt like a personal failure." He looked at me, his gray eyes clear and honest. "But over time, it became a comfort. A connection. It's the last living thing she created. Taking care of it feels like taking care of a part of her." It was the most he had ever revealed about himself, about his loss. It was an offering of trust, a glimpse into the quiet, guarded chambers of his heart. I felt a profound sense of privilege, of being allowed into this sacred space with him. In that moment, kneeling in the dirt, we were not employer and employee, not rich and poor. We were just two men, sharing a moment of quiet understanding, connected by a shared appreciation for the beauty and pain of tending to something precious. "You're doing a good job," I said softly. "Taking care of it." Taking care of her. A small, sad smile touched his lips. He reached out, his hand hovering in the air for a second before he gently brushed a smudge of dirt from my cheek. His touch was feather-light, his fingers warm and calloused against my skin. It was an innocent gesture, but it sent a cascade of fire through my veins. My breath hitched. Our eyes met, and in that long, silent moment, the carefully constructed walls between us seemed to dissolve. The air grew thick with unspoken things. I saw a flicker of something in his eyes, a deep, resonant loneliness, and something else, a yearning that mirrored my own so perfectly it stole the air from my lungs. It was all there, in that one, lingering look. The attraction that had been simmering beneath the surface of our every interaction, the quiet pull that had drawn us together from that first mistaken delivery. He pulled his hand back as if he'd been burned, his composure returning like a mask snapping into place. He stood up abruptly. "We should get back to it," he said, his voice a little too tight. "There's still a lot to do before the party." He turned away and picked up his trowel, but the moment lingered in the air between us, shimmering and undeniable. Something had shifted. The safe container of our professional relationship had cracked, revealing the fragile, volatile truth of what was growing between us. And I knew, with a terrifying certainty, that things would never be the same. The charity event was a week away, and a palpable tension began to build, both in the preparations for the party and in the space between me and Julian. We continued to work side by side in the garden, but the easy silence we had shared was now filled with a new, charged awareness. Every accidental brush of our hands as we reached for the same tool, every shared glance across a flower bed, felt significant, loaded with unspoken meaning. He seemed to be actively avoiding a repeat of the intimacy we'd shared. He kept our conversations strictly focused on the garden, his tone brisk and professional. But I would catch him watching me when he thought I wasn't looking, his expression a mixture of contemplation and a deep, unsettling sadness. It was as if he were fighting a battle with himself, and I was the unwilling prize. One afternoon, as I was packing up the tools for the day, a sleek black car pulled up the driveway. A woman in a sharp business suit got out, her heels clicking on the stone pavers. She was elegant, poised, and she greeted Julian with a familiar, easy kiss on the cheek. "Arthur is running late, as usual," she said, her voice crisp. "He sent me ahead to make sure you haven't turned the place into a complete jungle." Her eyes swept over the garden, then landed on me, a cool, dismissive glance that took in my dirt-stained clothes and sweaty face in a single, calculating sweep. "Catherine, this is Leo," Julian said, his voice carefully neutral. He's been helping me with the grounds. Ah, she said, the single syllable dripping with condescension. The temporary help. She gave me a tight, dismissive smile, and then turned her back on me, looping her arm through Julian's. Now, darling, we must discuss the seating chart. We can't have the Hendersons anywhere near the Grants after that fiasco in Aspen. I watched them walk toward the house, my stomach churning with a hot, sour mixture of jealousy and humiliation. The way she had looked at me, the way she had so effortlessly claimed him, it was a stark reminder of my place in this world. I was the help, a temporary fixture. I didn't belong here, in this life of charity events and fiascos in Aspen. I felt a familiar, cold despair begin to creep in. The last few weeks had been a fantasy, a temporary reprieve from my real life. I had allowed myself to believe that the connection I felt with Julian was real, that it transcended the vast differences between us. But Catherine's arrival had shattered that illusion. When Julian came back out a few minutes later, his face was a stony mask. I apologize for that, he said, his voice tight. Catherine can be abrasive, it's fine, I said, my voice flat. I couldn't meet his eyes. I turned and began coiling a hose with jerky, angry movements. No, it's not fine, he said, stepping closer. The way she spoke to you was unacceptable. He reached out and put a hand on my arm, stopping my frantic movements. Leo, look at me. Reluctantly, I lifted my head. His eyes were dark with an emotion I couldn't read. What she thinks doesn't matter, he said, his voice low and intense. What anyone else thinks doesn't matter. The only thing that matters is what you and I know to be true. And what is that? I challenged, my voice laced with a bitterness that surprised even me. That I'm the gardener? That you're doing me a favor out of pity? A flash of pain crossed his face. Is that what you think this is? He asked, his voice raw. Pity. I don't know what to think. I burst out, pulling my arm away from his grasp. 1 minute, you're looking at me like you see me. And the next, you're shutting me out. Your friend comes and looks at me like I'm something she scraped off her shoe. I don't fit here, Julian. I'm a mistake. Just like that first delivery, the silence that followed was heavy, broken only by the chirping of crickets in the evening air. Julian just stood there, watching me, his face pale in the twilight. He looked older, tired, the weight of his solitary life etched into the lines around his eyes. You were never a mistake, Leo, he said finally, his voice barely a whisper. He took a step closer, closing the distance between us until he was standing right in front of me. He reached up, not to touch my cheek this time, but to cup my jaw, his thumb stroking gently along the line of my stubble. His touch was electric, and despite my anger, my body leaned into it, craving the connection. This, he said, his gaze dropping to my lips, has nothing to do with pity. And it has nothing to do with you being my gardener. His eyes, dark and stormy, lifted to meet mine again. This is about the fact that from the moment you showed up at my door, flustered and apologetic, with a bag full of groceries I didn't order, my house has felt less empty, my breath caught in my throat. His confession was so simple, so painfully honest, it shattered my defenses. I've been keeping my distance, he continued, his voice thick with emotion, because I am terrified. I am 20 years older than you, Leo. I live a life you can't imagine, surrounded by people like Catherine. I was trying to protect you from that. From me. From the assumptions people would make. I don't care about the assumptions. I whispered, my own anger melting away, replaced by a wave of pure, aching tenderness for this man and his lonely, guarded heart. I do, he said fiercely. I care. I will not have you be the subject of gossip. I will not have anyone think that you are with me for any reason other than your own free will. He paused, his thumb tracing the curve of my lower lip. So I'm asking you, Leo. I am asking you plainly. Is this just a job to you? Is that all you want from me? The question was a key, turning a lock deep inside me. He was giving me all the power, all the agency. He was laying his own vulnerability bare and asking for my truth in return. And I knew, in that moment, that I couldn't hide anymore. I couldn't let fear or pride or the judgment of others dictate my life. I am here, now, in this moment. His hand is on my face, a warm, solid weight that anchors me. The scent of him, clean soap, rich earth, and the faint, masculine scent that is uniquely Julian, fills my senses. The world narrows to this single point, to the space between our bodies, humming with a power that has been building for weeks. This is real. This is happening. I lift my hand and cover his, pressing his palm more firmly against my skin. My heart is a frantic drum against my ribs, but my voice, when it comes, is steady, clear. No, I say, the word a release, a vow. It was never just a job. A tremor runs through him, a visible wave of relief that softens the hard lines of his face. His eyes search mine, looking for any hint of doubt, any flicker of uncertainty. He finds none. It's more than a job. I continue, the words tumbling out now that the dam has broken. It has been from the beginning. From that first night. I was scared. I'm still scared. Of all this. I gesture vaguely at the grand house behind him, of the difference between us. But I'm more scared of walking away from this. From you. Julian's eyes close for a brief second, a moment of profound, private emotion. When he opens them again, they are shining with a startling vulnerability. I have been waiting, he says, his voice thick, for you to feel safe enough to say that. I hoped. But I couldn't let myself believe it was possible. He leans his forehead against mine, a gesture of such profound intimacy, it makes my knees weak. I feel the same, Leo. God help me. I feel exactly the same. The world falls away. There is no garden, no house, no judgmental friends, or insurmountable class differences. There is only the rough texture of his skin under my palm, the warmth of his breath against my lips, the steady, grounding presence of him. He is the foundation I have been searching for my entire life. He pulls back just enough to look at me, his gray eyes asking a silent question. It's a question of permission, of consent, of final, terrifying surrender. I answer him not with words, but by closing the small distance between us. The kiss is not what I expected. It is not a clash of desperate need, but a soft, tentative meeting. It is gentle. It is questioning. His lips are firm and warm, and they move against mine with a slow, deliberate tenderness that speaks of reverence, of a long-held desire finally acknowledged. It is a kiss that tastes of hope and rain-washed air and the faint, sweet flavor of Earl Grey tea. I sigh into his mouth, a sound of pure contentment, and wrap my arms around his neck, pulling him closer. He responds by sliding his arms around my waist, gathering me against his solid frame until there is no space left between us. The kiss deepens, no longer tentative, but filled with the certainty of reciprocated feeling. It is a communication far more profound than words, a silent conversation of shared loneliness and a dawning, brilliant hope. It is right. Utterly, terrifyingly, wonderfully right. It feels like coming home to a place I have never been before. When we finally break apart, we are both breathless. We stay there for a long moment, wrapped in each other's arms, foreheads pressed together, our breathing slowly returning to normal. He laces his fingers through mine, his grip firm and reassuring. The gesture is so simple, so natural, it feels more intimate than the kiss itself. It is a promise, an anchor. So, he says, his voice a low rumble against my chest. What do we do now? I look up at him, at the face I have come to know so well, and a slow, genuine smile spreads across my own. I have no idea, I admit. And for the first time in my life, the uncertainty doesn't feel like a threat. It feels like a beginning. The next morning, I woke up in my own bed, the pale dawn light filtering through my single window. For a disorienting moment, I thought the night before might have been a dream, a fantasy spun from exhaustion and longing. But then I saw my work boots by the door, still flecked with the rich, dark soil from Julian's garden, and I knew it was real. The memory of his kiss, of the solid warmth of his arms around me, was a vivid, physical presence. A knot of my old anxiety tightened in my stomach. What now? The kiss had changed everything, shattering the simple employer-employee dynamic and leaving us in a new, undefined territory. I was terrified. The reality of our differences came crashing back in the harsh light of day. He was Julian Croft, a man who moved in circles I couldn't even fathom, a man whose life was built on a foundation of wealth and power. And I was Leo, the guy with a dead car and a mountain of debt. The imbalance was a chasm, and I was afraid of falling in, of losing myself completely. When I arrived at his house that morning, using the truck that was another symbol of my dependency, the fear was a cold weight in my chest. I let myself into the garage and walked toward the garden, my steps hesitant. What if he regretted it? What if, In the light of day, he saw the foolishness of it all. He was already there, standing on the stone terrace, a mug of coffee in his hand. He was watching the sunrise, his back to me. He wore a simple t-shirt and jeans, looking less like a billionaire and more like any other man enjoying a quiet morning. My heart ached at the sight of him. He must have heard my footsteps, because he turned. His face was unreadable for a moment, his usual calm composure firmly in place. My stomach plummeted. I had been a fool, a diversion. But then his eyes met mine, and a slow, gentle smile softened his features. It was a smile just for me, warm and private. "Good morning," he said, his voice a low, comforting rumble. "Morning." I managed my voice tight. He seemed to sense my unease immediately. His gaze sharpened with perception, taking in my tense posture, my worried expression. He set his mug down on the low stone wall and walked toward me, stopping a few feet away, giving me space. "Leo," he began, his tone serious but kind. "About last night. I don't want you to feel pressured or obligated. Nothing has to change if you don't want it to." His words, meant to reassure, only confirmed my fears. He was giving me an out, an easy way to retreat back to the safety of our old arrangement. It would be the smart thing to do, the self-protective thing. But I was tired of being self-protective. I was tired of living in a fortress of my own fear. "Is that what you want?" I asked, my voice stronger than I expected. "For things to go back to the way they were?" He was silent for a long moment, his gray eyes searching my face. "No," he said, the word quiet but absolute. "It's the last thing I want. But your comfort, your agency in this, that is more important to me than anything. I know the position you're in. I put you in it. You work for me. You're driving my truck. You're living in my orbit. The power dynamic is complicated." He was naming it. He was acknowledging the elephant in the room, the source of all my anxiety. He wasn't ignoring it or pretending it didn't exist. He was laying it on the table between us, to be examined. The gesture was one of profound respect. "I don't want you to ever feel trapped," he continued. "So, I want to be very clear. The gardening job is just a job. You can finish it, or you can quit today, and it will have no bearing on us. We can keep it separate, or we can eliminate it entirely. It is your choice, Leo. Your independence is non-negotiable." He reached out and gently took my hand, his thumb stroking over my knuckles. It was a simple, grounding touch, a quiet reassurance that he was on my side. The knot of fear in my chest began to loosen. He wasn't trying to own me or control me. He was trying to build a bridge across the chasm between us, a bridge built on honesty and mutual respect. "I want to finish the job," I said, surprising myself. "I like the work. It feels real. It feels like mine." He nodded, a look of understanding in his eyes. "All right, then that's what we'll do. And after the 2 weeks are up, we'll figure out what comes next." Together, the word together, hung in the air, a promise of a future I hadn't dared to imagine. It was terrifying and exhilarating all at once. Just then, a car door slammed somewhere down the lane. A few moments later, a woman with a small dog on a leash came into view on the public path that bordered the edge of Julian's property. It was one of his neighbors, a notorious gossip I'd seen around town. She slowed as she saw us, her eyes widening as she took in the scene. Julian, holding my hand, the two of us standing close together on the terrace in the early morning light. Her expression was a mixture of shock and avid curiosity. I instinctively started to pull my hand away, a hot flush of shame creeping up my neck. All my fears about gossip, about judgment, came rushing back. But Julian's grip on my hand tightened, not painfully, but firmly. He didn't let go. He simply turned his head and gave the woman a polite, placid nod. "Morning, Eleanor," he said, his voice calm and steady. The woman, flustered at being caught staring, gave a jerky nod in return and hurried on her way, practically dragging her dog behind her. Julian turned back to me, his expression soft. He lifted my hand and pressed a gentle kiss to my knuckles. "Let them talk," he said quietly. "Their opinions have no power over us." And in that moment, standing with him in the morning sun, his hand holding mine, I believed him. We were a team. We would face the world together. The fear was still there, a faint tremor beneath the surface, but it was overshadowed by a powerful, burgeoning hope. We were navigating this new territory, and we were doing it on our own terms. The day of the party arrived, a perfect, sun-drenched Saturday. The garden was immaculate, a testament to our weeks of hard work. Every petal seemed to be in its place, every stone path swept clean. I felt a deep, abiding pride in what we had accomplished. It was more than just a job. It was something we had created together. My contract was officially over, but Julian had asked me to come to the party. Not as staff, but as his guest. The invitation had sent a fresh wave of anxiety through me. Me, at a party with his wealthy, sophisticated friends? I would be completely out of my element. I don't have anything to wear, I had stammered, the excuse sounding lame even to my own ears. Julian had just smiled. I have that covered, he'd said, and the day before, a box had arrived at my apartment from the most expensive men's store in the city. Inside was a perfectly tailored linen suit, a crisp white shirt, and soft leather shoes. There was no note, just the clothes. It was another gesture that could have felt like charity, but somehow, from him, it felt like an act of care, a way of smoothing my path, of making sure I felt comfortable and confident. As I stood in front of my cracked bathroom mirror, dressed in clothes that cost more than my car was worth, I barely recognized myself. I looked polished, adult, like someone who might actually belong at a party at the Croft estate. When I arrived, the party was in full swing. The garden was filled with elegantly dressed people, their laughter mingling with the soft strains of a string quartet. Waiters moved among the guests with trays of champagne and elaborate hors d'oeuvres. It was a scene from a movie, and I felt a familiar sense of unreality. I saw Julian across the lawn, deep in conversation with a man who looked like a senator. He was the perfect host, moving through the crowd with an easy, understated grace. He looked magnificent in a dark blue suit that brought out the silver in his hair. Our eyes met across the crowd, and he gave me a small, private smile that made my heart skip a beat. He excused himself from his conversation and started making his way toward me. I was worried you wouldn't come, he said when he reached me, his voice a low murmur meant only for me. And missed the chance to see all our hard work appreciated? I joked, though my hands were clammy. He put a steadying hand on the small of my back. You look wonderful, he said, his eyes warm with genuine admiration. The simple compliment, and his solid presence beside me, was enough to quell the frantic fluttering in my stomach. He began to introduce me to his guests. This is Leo, he would say, his voice full of a quiet pride. He never specified our relationship, never defined me as his gardener or his friend or anything else. He just said my name, as if that were enough. And with his hand resting lightly on my back, a silent statement of possession and protection, it was. Some people were curious, their eyes lingering on us, trying to piece together the puzzle. I saw Catherine, the abrasive woman from the other day, watching us with a look of pure astonishment. But no one was rude. Julian's quiet authority seemed to create a protective bubble around us. To question my presence would be to question his judgment, and no one was willing to do that. We spent the next hour side by side, a comfortable unit. He'd draw me into conversations, ask for my opinion on topics ranging from art to politics, always treating me as an equal. And I found, to my surprise, that I could hold my own. The things I had learned in my 2 years of college, the books I read in my spare time, they had given me a foundation I hadn't realized I possessed. Later, as the sun began to set, casting a golden glow over the garden, we found ourselves alone by the koi pond. The party was a soft murmur of sound behind us. So, I said, breaking the comfortable silence. This is your world. He looked out at the crowd, his expression thoughtful. It's a part of my world, he corrected gently. It's the part one have to navigate. It's not the part that I choose, he turned to me, his gaze intense. The part one choose is quieter. It involves dirt under the fingernails and a good book and a cup of tea on a rainy afternoon. He took my hand, his fingers lacing with mine. It was a bold move, here in the open, with his whole world watching. But it felt completely natural. The part one choose, he said, his voice dropping lower. Is this, he lifted our joined hands. This is what's real to me. Leo, my heart felt like it was going to burst. All my insecurities, all my fears about not belonging, simply melted away under the warmth of his gaze. I belonged with him. It was as simple and as profound as that. We stood there for a long time, just holding hands, watching the light fade from the sky. We had made a conscious choice, a public declaration without saying a word. We had decided to move forward, together, with care and steadiness. We had named what was real, and we had chosen it over everything else. The following morning, I woke up not in my own bed, but in Julian's. The party had wound down late, and when the last guest had departed, he had simply turned to me and asked, "Stay?" It wasn't a question of seduction, but one of simple companionship, a request not to be alone. And I had said yes without a moment's hesitation. I was in one of his guest rooms, a beautiful, serene space with a bed so comfortable it felt like sleeping on a cloud. The sheets were crisp, high-thread count cotton that smelled faintly of lavender. Through the large window, I could see the garden we had tended, bathed in the soft morning light. It felt like a paradise. I found him in the kitchen, already dressed, making coffee. The scene was so wonderfully domestic it made my chest ache. The morning sun streamed into the room, glinting off the stainless steel appliances. He was humming softly to himself, a tune I didn't recognize. He looked relaxed, happy, younger than I had ever seen him. He smiled when he saw me. "There's coffee," he said, gesturing to a waiting mug on the counter. "I was just about to make some eggs. Are you hungry?" "Starving," I said, and it was true. I felt a lightness in my spirit, a kind of joyous hunger for life that I hadn't felt in years. We made breakfast together, moving around the large kitchen in an easy, comfortable dance. I chopped vegetables while he whisked the eggs, our movements synchronized as if we had been doing this for years. We didn't talk much, but the silence was filled with a quiet intimacy, a sense of rightness. This space, which had once felt so intimidating, now felt like a shared space. It felt like home. We ate on the terrace, at a small table overlooking the garden. The air was cool and fresh, and the city below was still shrouded in a thin morning mist. It was peaceful, perfect. "My car," I said suddenly, the thought popping into my head. "The mechanic said it was ready yesterday. I need to figure out how to pay for it." The intrusion of real-world problems felt jarring in our perfect bubble. Julian put his fork down and looked at me, his expression serious. "It's already been taken care of," he said quietly. I stared at him. "Julian, you can't just pay for everything. My car, my clothes. I can't let you do that." The old fear of dependency, of being a kept man, flared up. He reached across the table and took my hand. "Leo, listen to me. I have resources. It is a fact of my life. Using them to make our life together easier is not a transaction. It is not about controlling you or buying your affection. It is an act of love, just as your work in the garden was an act of love. We contribute what we have. I have money. You have you," he smiled. "You have a light that has been missing from this house for a very long time. It is a more than fair exchange." He squeezed my hand. "But I understand. Your independence is important. So, we will set boundaries. We will have a conversation, a real one, about finances. We will figure out a way for you to contribute that feels right to you. Maybe you go back to school. I could help with that. Maybe you start your own small landscaping business. I could be your first client. We will figure it out. Together. The point is, we are a partnership. And partners help each other." His words were a balm to my anxious soul. He wasn't dismissing my fears. He was meeting them with practical solutions and unwavering reassurance. He saw me, all of me, including my pride and my fear, and he loved me anyway. I looked out over the garden, at the city below, at the man sitting across from me, his hand holding mine. My life, just a few weeks ago, had been so small, so circumscribed by worry and want. I had been living in black and white, and then Julian had walked into it, or rather, I had stumbled into his, and he had filled my world with color. I was no longer just surviving. I was beginning to live. The difference in our ages, in our bank accounts, those were just facts. They were the context of our story, not the story itself. The story was about two lonely people who found each other by mistake, who built a bridge across their differences with trust and respect, and a shared love for the quiet beauty of a garden. He had given me a foundation, not of money, but of steady, unconditional care. And I, in turn, had brought life back to his quiet, orderly world. It was a partnership of equals, shaped not by power, but by a quiet, gentle love. "Okay," I said, my voice thick with emotion. I brought his hand to my lips and kissed it. Together, he smiled, a brilliant, beautiful smile that lit up his entire face. And in that moment, sitting on his terrace in the warm morning sun, I knew with absolute certainty that I was home. Share your thoughts in the comments. What moment stayed with you? If the story resonated, a like helps others find it. Subscribe for more slow burn male/male love stories told with warmth and care.